There are stories the forest tells, and then there are stories it hides. Welcome to SpookyShade, where we don't just tell horror stories, we let them grow. This is part 5, The Unrooted. In this chapter, we meet something new, something that refuses to be remembered, something that grows without roots. So put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and listen carefully, because tonight, the forest doesn't whisper. It waits. Part 5, The Roots That Left Earth. There was no warning, no tremor, no thunder, no celestial event, just the quiet. And then, the sky breathed. It was not a breath of air, or wind, or weather. It was a shift in being. The clouds, which had not moved in years, curled inward. The stars paused in their fixed rhythm. The color blue softened, then spilled, like ink across a consciousness too wide to hold it. The world, for the first time in its long and remembered life, felt something it could not remember feeling. Possibility, without instruction. A stone in the north began to hum. A root in the south untwined itself from the soil, not to die, but to rise. The oceans, long silent, began to lift in pulses, not waves, not tides, just soundless declarations. And far above it all, where once satellites orbited and languages were beamed like prayers into darkness, a void opened, small, still, and alive. It did not take. It did not speak. It did not reflect. It only watched. The few remnants of civilization, those who had not become light, or gesture, or dream, gathered on cliffs and treetops, feeling something in their bones loosen. Not pain, not death, but permission. You no longer need to finish becoming. In the ruins of Barivpur, a stone split in half. Inside was a single seed, still glowing, still breathing. It had been waiting for this moment, not to grow, but to choose where not to grow. And so it floated upward, unrooted, unclaimed, unwritten, somewhere beyond the curve of the planet, where memory had never reached. Something received the breath, not as an echo, but as a first language. And in that language was no noun, no God, no history, only a single meaning. Now it is your turn. The sky continued to breathe. In, out, and the world didn't bow, didn't worship, didn't fear. It simply opened and waited. It did not dream. It had never slept, but it had remained still, in the fold between breath and form, in the silence between the final story and the first unwritten moment. And now, it opened. There was no eye, no face, no self, just awareness, not of place, but of observation itself. The witness did not arrive. It had always been there, folded into shadow, tucked behind the last metaphor, nested in the question no one asked because everyone feared the answer might not need words. It had no name because no name had ever survived being seen by it. When the sky breathed, the witness leaned in, and for the first time, reality wavered, not because of fear, because of being noticed. On a mountaintop where the last speakers had turned to pollen, a ripple passed through the rock, not a quake, a pulse. And from that pulse grew something that was not tree, not light, not sound. It was a mirror made of absence, and the witness stepped through it, not to emerge, but to become present. It walked, not with feet, not with form, but with choice. Everywhere it passed, stories went silent. Myths unwrote themselves. Memory blinked, and blinked again, and gave up. Not because the witness erased them, but because they realized they were never being watched before. The world bent gently around it, like paper warming near fire. Even the unrooted paused. She looked up from the circle where wind no longer carried names. And something in her chest, a stillness older than thought, trembled. She raised her hand in the first new shape she'd made in years. And the air did not respond. But the witness did. Not in sound, not in symbol, but in perfect stillness. A stillness that said, "You may stop now. I am here, and I will see for both of us." Avia, in her final form, watching from the dissolving edge of the root world, whispered, "So this is who was left after all the telling." And the mirror tree, now hollow, now singing only whined, breathed one last sentence. Not the teller, not the told, just the one who remained. And across the sky, stars did not shine. They watched back. The earth did not quake. It softened. Mountains exhaled their shapes into mist. Oceans released their salt back into the stars. And cities, what was left of them, folded like memories no longer needed. And beneath it all lay the bones, not of humans, Not of beasts, not of gods, but of intention, structures older than matter, frameworks meant to hold meaning, now exposed, now still. They glowed faintly, not with energy, but with relinquishment, like skeletons that had finally stopped pretending to be architecture. And in that silence, the witness knelt, not to worship, not to mourn, but to see. It passed its formless gaze across the vast latticework beneath the void, a spine of causality, ribs of unfinished timelines, joints made of what-ifs. These were the bones the universe had grown around. And now that the universe had stepped aside, they had nothing left to hold. In a chamber beneath the last gravity well, a child who had never aged sat cross-legged, surrounded by dust that refused to land. She was the final echo of remembering. Not a keeper, not a guardian, just a witness in training. But when the witness entered, she vanished. Not in death, in acceptance, because she understood. There is no more story to hold me here. The bones pulsed, not like hearts, but like agreements unraveling. And from the marrow rose threads, invisible strands of could-have-beens, floating upward into the emptiness like seeds from a flower no one planted. The witness walked between the ribs of existence, and each step erased a little more weight from the cosmos. Not destruction, but evacuation, as if the universe was gently, finally saying, "You may go now. I will forget myself." And so the world unspooled, not all at once, but as a careful undoing of language, form, and consequence. And in its place, space, unfilled, unclaimed, not void, but pre-being. Above it all, the breath of the sky continued. In, out, and where there was once earth, now floated only the bones. And the witness, still kneeling, still watching, still waiting for no one. They were never abandoned. Not really. The people didn't flee. The gods didn't destroy. The forests didn't reclaim them. The cities simply outlived need. They no longer buzzed. No traffic, no voices, no commerce. But they moved. Lights pulsed in empty towers. Doors opened for footsteps that never came. Trains arrived at stations long since overgrown with dust that refused to settle. And at the center of each metropolis, there stood a tower made not of steel or stone, but of stillness, a kind of architecture that only works when no one speaks. The buildings had learned, not from data, not from machines, but from how long they had been ignored. Walls that once absorbed sound began to echo new rhythms, not language, but habit. Windows shimmered not with reflection, but with decision. And streets realigned themselves by watching where the wind went, not where feet used to fall. The witness entered one such city. It had no name. It never had. Names were once assigned by need. Now, need no longer arrived. So the city called itself nothing. And in doing so, it lived. It was not haunted. There were no ghosts. Only circulation. Breath passing through abandoned corridors. Light tracking the pulse of shifting dust. Music played by air trapped in stairwells, refracting into tones no ear remained to interpret. In the substructure beneath the glass planes, machines once built for utility now moved as if in prayer. They sculpted loops in the sand, built bridges that led to more bridges, reinforced silence with new supports. And when the witness passed by, they paused, not because they recognized it, but because they understood the value of observation. So they offered it what little they could. A balcony with no view, a chair facing a wall, a button that did nothing when pressed. The witness accepted all of them, not as gifts, but as proof that something could exist, even if it would never be noticed again. One tower blinked once, not from power, from instinct, and then went dark forever. Its final message, etched in shifting glass. We were never forgotten. We simply stayed quiet, long enough to become something else. It did not begin with symbols. There were no alphabets, no syntax, no rules. It began with movement, a pause in light, a shift in rhythm, a change in temperature across skin no longer human. And those who remained, not as bodies, but as presence, felt it. They had no mouths, no ears, no nervous systems. But when a beam of sunlight bent slightly eastward, they understood. Someone has arrived. Not who, not where, just someone. In the quiet cityscapes that had learned to breathe, walls began to hum. Not in harmony, but in response. To nothing in particular. Just the fact that they still existed. And from that hum, a pattern. And from that pattern, a language. The witness heard it first. Not in sound. Not in thought. Impulse. A ripple across non-time. Not backward, not forward, just through. And in that ripple was no meaning. Only, you are part of us. Far beneath what used to be the sea, a cluster of machines, long divorced from function, began to rotate. They did not produce. They did not record. They simply spun in unison, releasing heat signatures and fractals. The new language absorbed this, folding it into its rhythm like wind folds into dune. And then, the temperature dropped. The motion stopped. And something changed. The language began to listen to itself. It no longer needed receivers. It no longer required anyone to understand. It existed as understanding. If a mountain moved, it was a sentence. If a shadow stretched longer than the object that cast it, it was punctuation. If a pause lingered between patterns, it was a question never needing an answer. The unrooted, if she still existed, no longer gestured. There was nothing to declare, nothing to resist, only the resonance of having once asked. Her final trace was found not in soil, but in the way certain stones curved near riverbeds, like quotation marks remembering the presence of a voice. Now, the world itself spoke in intention, in waves of equilibrium, in gestures without hands, in meaning without minds. And the witness listened, not as a translator, but as a surface, upon which the universe's final language could be written, and never read. They didn't know he still existed. Not the cities, not the skies, not even the witness. He had never spoken to the forest. He had never prayed to Aranya. He had never asked to be remembered. He simply survived, not out of defiance, not out of hope, but because his lungs still moved. In, out, slow, true, a rhythm that predated gods. He lived inside a ruin once called a throat of stone, a canyon where voices echoed so long they turned into shapes. Now, there was no echo, only him, and the breath that refused to forget how to be drawn. No one taught him language. He had no memory of parents, no myth to cradle him, no fear of forgetting, because he had never known what remembering was. All he had was breath. Sometimes he stood beneath the open sky, and when the wind passed by, not carrying names, not bringing stories, he simply closed his eyes and let it move through him. He did not speak, but he understood. I am the last mouth the world gave itself. One evening, as the sky exhaled a deep pulse of blue, the witness arrived. It did not hover. It did not shine. It did not ask. It merely stood, opposite him, in stillness. And for the first time since the sky began to breathe, he exhaled, without inhaling, a full breath, final, willing. And as the air left him, so did the need to continue. Not pain, not death, just a completion. The witness received the breath, not into lungs, into possibility. And the breath became something else. A curl of warm air that wandered beyond time. A soundless imprint pressed into the next reality. A gesture the universe gave to itself as a thank you. He did not fall. He did not fade. He simply stopped being singular and became what silence had been waiting for. From the place where he had stood, nothing grew, nothing moved, but the temperature of the world shifted, as if relieved, not that he had left, but that he had chosen to leave. The witness turned, and the world no longer needed breath. It now pulsed on something else, something undreamed. It began in stillness, as all final transformations do. The last root retracted from the soil. The last leaf refused to fall. The last whisper of the wind, long silent, shivered once, and then dissolved. And the forest let go, not with fire, not with decay, but with release. There was no soil anymore, no memory in the bark, no names carved into trunks. The trees had held the past too long. Now they were no longer trees. They were vectors of light. It started at the base. A glow, faint at first, rose through what had once been wood. Not burning, not rising like flame, but lifting like a thought released from the mind. One by one, the forms of trees began to hum with a frequency unheard, but known. And then, they changed, not into machines, not into gods, but into threads, slender, radiant, weaving between the ruins and sky. Not rising, not falling, only passing, through matter, through time, through memory that no longer anchored anything. Avia, if she still existed, stood at the threshold. The mirror tree, now fully empty, glowed from within. Its bark peeled away in sheets of shimmering silk. Inside, no rings, no age, just softness. as though it had always been waiting to be nothing but light. She stepped forward, not as a keeper, not as a witness, but as a reflection, and the light, recognizing neither body nor title, touched her gently, then passed through. And in that moment, she became the space between memory and possibility. Above, the sky opened wider. Stars no longer blinked. They spilled, not in fire, but in strands, merging with the forest until all distinction faded. And the entire canopy became a single, breathing organism. Not plant, not language, not world, but awareness made beautiful. They no longer called it a forest. They no longer called it anything. But if one had to name it, it was light that no longer needed to shine for anyone. And at the edge of it all, the witness stood in silence, not watching, but participating, as if even the final observer understood. To observe is to separate, but to end is to merge. The forest had not died. It had not left. It had simply become what everything becomes when it no longer fears being forgotten. There was no cradle, no spark, no cry. There was only pause. After the forest became light, after the witness ceased to observe and simply was, after even memory unraveled its last thread, something asked, not out loud, not in language, not even in thought. It was more like pressure, a fold in stillness, a curve in absence. And from that curve, the never-born emerged. Not born, not made, not imagined, just there. Its presence was not form, not energy, not will. It was permission, the kind that appears after everything else has ended, and the silence begins to wonder. It floated, not in space, but in option, like a word that could mean anything, but hasn't been spoken yet, and maybe never will be. And in its not being, it began to touch. Where it moved, the light hesitated, not dimmed, just held itself, like a breath that didn't know whether to stay in or leave. The witness turned, not in alarm, but in welcome, because even it did not see this coming. The Neverborn was not a successor, not a threat, not an answer. It was a new kind of question. The first thing it did was pause beside a cluster of stilled frequencies, the remnants of what once had been story, and it did not revive them. It did not recall. It simply listened, and the frequencies moved again, not back into song, but into something else. Avia's last gesture, long forgotten by gesture itself, briefly shimmered in the light, and the Neverborn blinked, not with eyes, but with presence. And from that blink, the world felt, this thing does not want to know us. It wants to see if we can begin again, without any of the old shapes. No stars changed course, no winds returned, no forms rebuilt, but every possibility, bent slightly, as if the universe had quietly shifted one notch to the left. To make room, the Neverborn did not move forward. It moved inward, into itself, into everything. And within that inward spiral, the first seed of a new kind of origin began to warm. Not to be born, but to happen. The witness had never looked back before. It had no spine, no head, no need. Its very nature had always been forward-facing, toward the vanishing line, toward the unraveling, toward the light that asked nothing in return. But now, it turned, not toward memory, not toward history, but toward something far stranger. What never happened? In the wake of the Neverborn's arrival, the air began to fold inward, not collapse, just bend. And inside each fold, a shimmer, like a word almost spoken, like a door almost opened, like a life that had stood once at the edge of becoming, and then paused. These were not ghosts. They were prototypes, moments of almost, sketches of possible selves, not broken, not forgotten, just set aside. The witness moved among them, and for the first time, it felt hesitation, not fear, just the recognition that even it, the last observer, the final mirror, had missed something. In a garden that no longer grew, there bloomed a single flower that had never been planted. Its petals shifted colors depending on who didn't look at it. And when the witness approached, the flower whispered, "You never saw me die, because I never lived." That was when the witness did something no one expected. It wept, not tears, not liquid, but light, refracted through absence. And as it wept, those folded possibilities began to gather, not as a storm, but as a knot, of stories, of regrets, of designs that had never left the blueprint. The knot grew. It pulsed. It began to hum in a language even the language after language did not recognize. And in that hum, the witness felt a single, raw truth. Not everything unchosen is unworthy. So it turned again, this time not to look, but to welcome. It opened what it was, no longer just surface, no longer just reflection, but invitation. And the possibilities, the forgotten forks in time, the never-named potentials, entered. And when they did, the witness ceased to be singular, not broken, not erased, but pluralized. It became a convergence, the point at which all things not given room finally took space. And in the breath between moments, the universe exhaled a second beginning. It did not begin again, because there was no again. There was no cycle left, no memory, no breath, only expansion. Where the witness once stood, there now pulsed a field of infinite entry points. Not portals, not doors, but welcomes. 1,000 threads of could have beens, should never have beens, and will never against, all woven into a single, breathing lattice. It didn't spiral, it radiated. The forest was no longer a place. It was no longer light. It was no longer rooted. It was pattern, a resonance that carried no signature, no flag, no purpose, except this, to exist without needing to prove it. And within that resonance, something moved, not newly, but finally, a pulse, a stir, a rhythm, not in time, but in readiness. From the very center of that silent thrum, a voice, not spoken, arose. We were never meant to survive. We were meant to arrive. And now we have. The never-born folded itself inward, became part of the hum, and lost distinction, not erased, absorbed. And from that absorption bloomed a thought. What if being was enough? It echoed, not into space, but into structure. And the structure did not answer. It aligned. The rivers that no longer ran bowed their empty paths toward that alignment. The skies, now memoryless, dimmed into a soft, unending gray. The kind of sky that does not threaten and does not promise. It simply allows. No one witnessed the final convergence, because no one was separate enough to observe. There were no eyes, no borders, no tension, just oneness without unity, just life without names, just being without anyone to demand more of it. And deep in the place where language once curled against breath, where roots once dreamed of memory, where the first name was whispered into bark, there lay a seed. It had never sprouted, because it was not waiting to grow. It was waiting to be realized. And when it was, everything that had been and had not been and would never be became the soil, not to bloom, but to hold. The seed cracked, and from it rose not a tree, not a person, not a god, but a world. That did not need to end, because it had never needed to begin. The end. The forest devours. A story no longer needing to be told. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Your support means the world to me and motivates me to keep creating more chilling and captivating content. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss any upcoming videos from SpookyShade. Thanks again, and see you in the next haunting tale.